Even among friends, good manners are crucial. My mother often emphasized this, especially when it came to money, insisting that everything be done properly. Whether or not it applied to past situations, I never imagined how relevant her advice would become. My name is S. I'm a 30-year-old part-time worker living with my 4-year-old daughter and my husband Bob, who works in an office. We rent an apartment 2 train stops away from my in-laws, who live conveniently close to Bob's workplace. As a result, Bob often has dinner at their place. While it might seem considerate, the reality is that Bob is thoughtless and self-centered. He casually stops by his parents' house after work without informing me, even though I'm at home preparing dinner. I've spoken to him about it many times, but he always makes excuses like, "Mom's making meatloaf and mashed potatoes tonight," and never apologizes. Fortunately, my father-in-law usually calls to ask, "Did Bob let you know he's coming over here?" This heads up at least saves our dinner from going to waste. While my father-in-law is considerate, my mother-in-law is quite the opposite. She often makes snide remarks like, "Bob just prefers my cooking over his wife's." Whenever Bob visits them, she'd call to gloat, "He just feels more at ease at home. Sally, you need to make a home where your husband wants to stay." She looks down on me, asserting her superiority as a woman and a mother. She also has a habit of barging into our apartment whenever she finds the time. Bob can't relax with this kind of cleaning. "And what's this in the fridge?" She'd criticize my cleaning, snoop through our fridge, and even throw out my cooking, saying, "How dare you serve Bob such an awful meal?" Any wife who doesn't take care of food is the worst. Everything you cook just goes to waste. When I pointed out that I could have eaten it instead of throwing it away, she'd retort, "You're the one wasting food." She'd turn red with rage and start yelling. My daughter would get scared and start crying, prompting my mother-in-law to hurriedly leave, not wanting to be disliked by her. She's selfish and quick to run away when things get tough. I confided in Bob about his mother's bullying, but he brushed it off with remarks like, "You're just imagining things," or "She doesn't mean any harm." The bright and sociable nature that initially attracted me to him now feels like a distant memory. These days, he's moody and dismissive, even ignoring our daughter when she tries to talk to him. His standing as a father has hit rock bottom. To make matters worse, the education fund we had been diligently saving for our daughter had completely disappeared. A significant sum, $40,000, had been withdrawn. I knew it had to be Bob, as he had access to the family account. When I confronted him about the missing money, he nonchalantly said, "Our daughter doesn't need the money right now. We can save up again when it's necessary." His cavalier attitude snapped something in me. "Are you serious? How could you just spend the money we saved together like that? It's not about needing it right now. We saved it because we don't know when we'll need it. What did you even spend it on?" "I helped out Mom," he replied. "Our money. Most of it comes from what I earned. Got a problem with that?" "I contributed too. I saved by cutting our budget and worked hard to manage that money." "Your contributions are insignificant." Our argument escalated, fortunately without waking our daughter. "That's it, we're getting a divorce. I knew you were careless, but to withdraw our child's savings without a word is unbelievable. Go ahead, like you can survive on a part-time salary." I was momentarily speechless. Seemingly satisfied with silencing me, he sneered, "I'm always ready for a divorce," and went back to his room. Though I clenched my fists in frustration, I refused to just cry myself to sleep. Determined, I began preparing for the divorce. I overheard my wife talking on the phone with Bob this morning. My father-in-law messaged me the following Friday. It seemed my mother-in-law had invited my husband for a special dinner that night. Since Bob hadn't mentioned anything to me, he was likely planning to go without telling me again. Ever since I declared my intention to divorce and was belittled for my part-time job, Bob's attitude toward me had shifted to one of disdain. He'd say things like, "I don't need to care for a dependent like you," while scattering the laundry around and neglecting to clean the room. His nitpicking, "You call this cleaning?" was just like his mother's. I saw the call from my father-in-law as the perfect opportunity to put my plan into action. I timed my visit to coincide with Bob's return from work, only to find that my father-in-law hadn't yet arrived home. Bob and my mother-in-law were visibly surprised to see me, but my mother-in-law sneered, "Oh, knowing we're having sushi for dinner, you decided to drop by and freeload? How despicable. You don't deserve sushi," Bob added, his tone harsh. It was clear they had no intention of letting me inside. Though the detached house had a wooden front door that wasn't very soundproof, Their loud shouting was audible outside. As usual, they were a selfish pair, completely oblivious to those around them. I haven't received any message about coming for sushi. The only thing I was told by your father was that you were visiting your parents' house. Are you being sarcastic because I didn't inform you? Do I need to report every move to a housemaid? It's creepy for a wife to talk to my dad behind my back, he said, seeming almost entranced by his own abusive words while my mother-in-law smirked in the background. I retorted, the one being creepy is you, causing her smile to falter. What did you say? It's disgusting to twist your father's kindness like that. You're just a lousy husband who can't communicate. Can't you see he's only trying to be considerate? My words seemed to strike a nerve. Realizing his lack of communication, Bob bit his lip and fell silent. Then you should have declined and avoided causing trouble for Dad with your brazen behavior, my mother-in-law defended him. But her words were hollow and meaningless. Keep arguing over there. I didn't come here to waste time with you. Let's get to the point. I want a divorce. What? Really? Bob's eyes widened in genuine shock. You think you can manage on a part-time salary? I'm not giving up our granddaughter. You're not fit to raise her. Go apologize to Mom. I calmly explained the situation to the shouting pair. Starting next month, I'll be working full-time again. I'm currently working part-time in medical administration at the same place where I worked full-time before we got married. When I mentioned considering a divorce to my colleagues, they recommended I return to full-time work. The kindergarten my daughter attends is near my workplace, so I can pick her up during my lunch break, and she can stay at the daycare till my shift ends. They even advised me on this. You can't possibly raise her on your own, my mother-in-law insisted. Anticipating you'd say that, I've already arranged to live with my parents. They're taking care of my daughter today. Unlike a certain husband who dismisses his daughter, they shower her with love and attention. What? My mother-in-law turned to Bob, who awkwardly looked away. Don't joke around, that's unacceptable. Her voice trembled with agitation. A father who secretly uses the education fund is harmful, I said firmly. At that moment, the front door opened, and my father-in-law appeared, saying, Sorry for interrupting. Can I hear more about this? It seemed he had been listening at the entrance. You use the education fund? What do you mean, Bob? Dad, it's not what it seems. Mom asked me for help with renovation costs, so I supported her, Bob said. Renovation costs? My father-in-law looked confused and turned to my mother-in-law for clarification. Bob suggested we move in together. It's more cost-effective than continuing to pay rent, and if we're going to live together, renovations are necessary, she explained. That's where the money went. I was overwhelmed by the new information. Moving in together? I haven't heard anything about that. And what about the education fund? Sally, can you clarify? I then explained to my father-in-law about the money Bob had withdrawn and that we were getting a divorce. Then you should just leave. Leave the granddaughter here. I'll take care of her, my mother-in-law insisted, her voice trembling. No, this is a decision made by my husband. I can't go back on a promise made between spouses. Ha! I don't remember agreeing to anything like that, I thought to myself. I pulled out a file from my bag and showed it to them. This is the pledge we made regarding the education fund, especially considering Bob's carelessness. I had documented our agreement just in case. My mother always said to document everything related to money, I explained. Bob's signature is here, my father-in-law observed, sounding impressed. What? Why is this here? Bob asked in a panic, likely having signed without fully understanding the terms. The agreement was straightforward. If the education funds were used for anything other than their intended purpose, it would lead to an immediate divorce. In such a case, custody of any children involved would go to the other parent. If Bob couldn't comply, he would be required to pay twice the amount used, giving me grounds to pursue divorce mediation. Essentially, Bob would lose custody and, if unable to meet his obligations, would owe me $80,000, allowing me to seek mediation for the divorce. If you follow your mother's advice, this will turn into a dispute involving an $80,000 payment. I've gathered ample evidence of both your usual behavior and your mother's treatment of me, so you can imagine who will get custody in mediation. I smiled slightly, and my husband gasped. Huh? My father-in-law looked surprised, let out a heavy sigh, and said to my mother-in-law, For now, return the money Bob gave you. You haven't started the renovations yet, so the money should still be there. Upon hearing this, my husband's face brightened, possibly thinking that returning the education fund might make the divorce impossible. My mother-in-law, facing his hopeful expression, turned pale and shook her head. "It's gone. I've already spent it," came a weak voice, eliciting gasps of surprise from everyone. "What?" My mother-in-law trembled and fell silent. "There was a bag I wanted and some clothes too. I only meant to borrow them, but I couldn't resist," she confessed. I was at a loss for words, but my father-in-law quickly responded, "This is ridiculous. What were you thinking?" But Bob said we could save up again for the granddaughter's education fund, so I thought it would be okay," she defended herself. "What? You knew it was meant for our daughter's education and still spent it. How can you say you won't hand over our granddaughter? Who's truly despicable here? You and Bob are the worst kind of parent and child," I said, my anger boiling over, my voice colder than I intended. My mother-in-law stared at me, stunned. "I'm sorry, but I no longer want to be part of this family." "I agree. They're nothing but toxic to our precious granddaughter." At these words, my mother-in-law broke down in tears. After that, I divorced Bob. Thanks to the evidence of mistreatment and the pledge, the child support and property division went as I had hoped. The education fund, which included a third from my salary, along with alimony, totaled $50,000, which I received. My ex-husband struggled to come up with the money, and my mother-in-law had to sell all her designer goods and jewelry to contribute. The remaining amount was covered by my father-in-law. Bob and his mother tried to blame my father-in-law, saying, "Helping your wife is a husband's job," but he became enraged and severed ties with both of them. My ex-husband approached my mother-in-law about moving in together after he had botched a project at work, leading to a demotion and a reduced salary. They could no longer afford their apartment rent and had to downsize to a smaller place. To raise the necessary funds, they were forced to cancel their life insurance policies. By pooling the money from each policy, they managed to cover the repayment amount. It seemed he was looking for sympathy when he reported the completed payment and recounted his struggles. When he spoke of his difficulties while informing me about the payment, I simply responded with a non-committal "aha" and let it go. Frustrated, he shouted over the phone, "Don't you have a word of gratitude?" "No, I don't. I have grievances of my own, so how about adding that to the bill and charging you for it?" I suggested, and he fell silent. I then hung up and changed my contact information. That was the last I heard from him. However, my mother-in-law later asked my father-in-law for a reconciliation, but he clearly refused. From what he gathered, their situation was dire. Their spending habits had not improved, and their finances were in disarray. Now, the once close parent-child duo were mired in constant arguments, blaming each other for their troubles. "Ha, your beloved son, isn't he?" my father-in-law said sarcastically. My mother-in-law retorted, "He's nothing but an irritating money pit." Whether dealing with parents, children, or spouses, it's crucial to be clear about financial matters. Reflecting on my mother's teachings, I felt a deep sense of affirmation in her wisdom. I'm Emily, 34, and my husband Bob is 27. Although we didn't notice the age gap much during our dating years, it became more apparent once we decided to marry. When I first met his parents, I was struck by their rural home in the Northeast and their deeply conservative views. They were initially very resistant to our relationship because of our age difference. I remember their disapproval vividly, with comments like, "They say an older wife is a rare find, but 7 years is quite a lot. Can Emily even have children at her age? Won't her eggs be too old?" Such remarks could easily alienate most women. While the father-in-law was merely rude, the mother-in-law was outright hostile. She declared, "I refuse to accept this. Why does Bob need to marry someone 7 years older? It's too embarrassing to even discuss with the neighbors. He'll soon be back here to take over the family business. And with your city background, you're simply not suited to be our daughter-in-law." Bob and I had been together for 6 years, and I had devoted nearly all my late 20s to him. I was committed to marrying him, and after living together for a few years, I didn't have the energy to search for someone else. In my frustration, I pushed Bob into proposing, and he reluctantly agreed. Perhaps due to his youth or just his nature, he seemed to prefer keeping things as they were. When his parents opposed our engagement, he quickly shifted his stance, saying, "See, I told you it was too soon to get married. We can just register our marriage later." I responded firmly, "It's not too soon. The age difference will change no matter how much time passes." Turning back to his parents with a polite smile, I said, "Yes, I am older than Bob, but that's something beyond our control. I promise to do my best to prove myself as a worthy daughter-in-law. I'm not perfect, but I hope you can accept me." Though they agreed with some reluctance, Bob's sister was adamantly opposed. At our first meeting, she bluntly declared, "Just so you know, don't refer to me as your sister-in-law. It's completely unacceptable for my brother to marry someone older than me." Looking back, I realized I was naive. Yet, with the confidence of someone who had navigated difficult clients in my work, I believed I could handle it. I now understand what they call bride bullying. I convinced myself that moving back to the countryside to live with the in-laws was not as bad as the horror stories I had read online. I should have called off the wedding at that point, but as they say, hindsight is 20/20. Now, a year later, I deeply regret getting married. Although our daily life and work routines didn't change much after we registered our marriage, one major shift was the frequent phone calls Bob started receiving from his mother. I could only guess what they were about, likely questioning when we moved back home and probably urging him to consider divorce. Whenever Bob received calls from his mother, he would retreat to another room or the bathroom, trying to shield me from overhearing. But with our small apartment, it was impossible not to catch snippets of the conversation. I often heard phrases like, "So Emily was saying," and couldn't help but listen in. It seemed they were accusing me of opposing the idea of moving back to Bob's hometown to live with his parents, but that wasn't true. When I asked Bob about moving back, he had expressed reluctance, saying he didn't want to live somewhere without a nearby convenience store and where job opportunities were scarce. It seemed he was using me as a scapegoat for his own unwillingness to return home. It was frustrating to see Bob cast me as the villain to cover up his own hesitations. Just now, I overheard Bob in the next room saying, "So, if I bring up divorce, I'd have to pay alimony, right?" His hesitation about divorce wasn't rooted in any lingering affection for me, but rather in his aversion to paying alimony. Hearing his true feelings was disheartening. It might be time to seriously consider divorce. Although we don't have children, I began contemplating it privately without mentioning it to anyone. Shortly after, I received a call about Bob's sister's upcoming wedding, prompting us to take the express train back to his family's home for the ceremony. Despite Bob being considered the heir, our wedding had been a modest family dinner, while his sister's wedding was set to be a lavish event. I wanted to fulfill my social obligations and avoid any further fault on our part, despite the disparity. The wedding was scheduled for the middle of a 3-day weekend, so Bob and I arrived at his family's home the day before. Bob's sister's fiancé is from a neighboring city, and the wedding was set to take place at a venue there, with plans for the relatives to travel by chartered bus on the day of the event. As the family home became a hub for relatives, they began arriving in droves. The ceremony was set for just after 2:00 p.m. To avoid overcrowding the venue's dressing rooms, the venue staff, hairdressers and dressers came to the house, and even Bob's parents were getting dressed up. Our own wedding had been more of a simple family dinner, so we wore slightly nicer everyday clothes. The contrast in treatment was stark and surprising. I had changed into the dress I had splurged on for the occasion, done my makeup, and was setting my hair when my father-in-law called out, "Hey Emily, could you serve some refreshments to the relatives waiting?" With a smile, I began handing out refreshments, introducing myself with, "Nice to meet you, I'm Bob's wife. Please enjoy the refreshments," and trying to make my presence felt with the poise of a seasoned TV announcer. Despite my mother-in-law's suggestion to stay in Bob's room, I was eager to fulfill my role and make a good impression. I was determined to make a positive impression. Shortly after, the bus arrived to take us to the wedding venue. The relatives boarded with excitement, and as I prepared to join them, my mother-in-law called out, "Wait a minute, Emily. I forgot the pearl necklace. Could you go get it?" "Really, in this formal dress?" I asked. She insisted, "It's in the drawer on top of the dresser in my room. It's a keepsake from my mother. Please hurry and bring it." "Understood. I'll look for it now," I replied. I hurried to my mother-in-law's room and began searching through the cluttered dresser drawer. The necklace wasn't immediately visible, and with everyone else already on the bus, I started to feel anxious. After about 5 minutes, I found a box that looked promising. I opened it quickly and dashed to the entrance, only to see that the bus had already left. The entire family, including Bob, had departed without me. "You've got to be kidding," I exclaimed, rubbing my eyes in disbelief. The bus was nowhere in sight. I panicked, realizing I'd left my cell phone in my bag. which had already been loaded onto the bus. I knew the venue's name but didn't have the phone number. Without my phone, I couldn't reach Bob, and without my wallet, I couldn't even get a taxi. What was I going to do? For a moment, I felt a wave of despair, but then I thought, do we even need to go to the wedding? My enthusiasm for the event had completely evaporated. It wasn't just my first time meeting the relatives. Surely, my in-laws and Bob must have noticed I wasn't on the bus. Their departure without me seemed unnecessarily cruel. The idea of divorce crossed my mind, but simply ending the marriage seemed too easy. I wanted revenge. After some contemplation, I devised a plan. I stepped outside with a calm demeanor and a smile, preparing to execute my scheme. When the relatives, in-laws, and Bob returned from the wedding around 5:00 p.m., they were visibly drunk. By then, I had gathered all my belongings except for the bag that had gone with them. I found a taxi company's number in a phone book next to the in-laws' home phone and called, requesting a taxi to pick me up in 30 minutes. Everything was set. I greeted them at the bus with an innocent expression. Bob's face showed guilt when he saw me, but he didn't say a word. My in-laws ignored me, preoccupied with sending off the relatives. The relatives glanced my way but left in their cars. I wished Bob would at least offer an apology, but that's just how he was. With a forced smile, I said to Bob, "Welcome back." He looked visibly relieved and began making excuses. "I didn't realize you weren't on the bus." I felt bad, but the ceremony was starting, so I couldn't come back for you. I ignored his excuses and started searching through the luggage for my bag, silently conveying my disbelief. I turned to him and said, "Divorce? Is this some kind of joke? Because it certainly feels like one." When Bob realized what I had said, he began to panic. "Who knows? I'm surprised you think such a petty lie would work. So what if you weren't noticed? Are you saying you forgot I existed until you saw me?" While both of his parents were awful, the real disappointment was Bob. He was left speechless, unable to defend himself. Then my father-in-law, after sending off the relatives, chimed in, "Come on, it was just a little forgetfulness on both sides. Bob's talking about divorce over something like this? City brides are really spineless." It seemed he was actually in favor of the divorce. My mother-in-law, upon hearing about it, smirked and said, "I knew it. A city bride just doesn't fit in. She was never right for our family." Her hypocrisy infuriated me. If that was how they felt, they should have just invited Bob to the wedding alone. Why make me travel all this way only to leave me behind? Anyone would be outraged by such treatment, whether they're a city bride or a country bride. When I shouted, my mother-in-law shouted back, "We never intended to invite you in the first place. There wasn't even a seat prepared for you. Bob brought you along by mistake, so we left you behind." What? I was shocked by her audacity. As I glared, Bob quickly looked away and shifted the blame to his mother, saying, "Well, Mom didn't explicitly say to come alone, so I assumed it meant as a couple." My mother-in-law's unreasonable anger continued. "And why did you go around serving tea and introducing yourself as the bride?" At the venue, relatives were asking why the wife didn't show up, not realizing Bob was even married. It made us look foolish. "That's your own fault, and it's absurd to say I shouldn't introduce myself," I retorted. It seemed my effort to introduce myself as Bob's wife to the relatives had made an impact. "So, you never intended to acknowledge me and planned to divorce me eventually. That's why you kept our wedding a secret from the relatives and made it seem like just a dinner party." Neither my father-in-law nor my mother-in-law responded, but their silence confirmed my suspicions. It was clear to me that severing ties with this family was the right decision. "Fine, I'll grant your wish and divorce you. I'm better off without a hostile family and an unreliable husband." I boarded the taxi that had just arrived and took the last train back to my apartment. Unable to sleep that night, I impulsively searched for lawyers online and began packing my belongings. I kept myself busy until dawn. When I finally woke up late the next day, I found several missed calls from Bob and my in-laws. It seemed my revenge had made its mark. After being left behind, I came up with a plan for revenge, but I wanted to keep it within the bounds of safety and legality. I didn't want to just divorce and suffer in silence without making a statement. I recalled how concerned my mother-in-law was about the neighbors' opinions. There was a surplus of refreshments and snacks she had bought for the relatives, so I decided to use them. I bagged up the leftover treats and set out around the neighborhood, greeting everyone with a smile. "Hello, I'm Bob's wife," I announced, and proceeded to share everything about how I had been treated and left behind on the wedding day. That evening, my mother-in-law and I had a loud argument outside. Naturally, the entire neighborhood heard, a perfect form of revenge for a family so worried about their public image. Afterward, Bob and I divorced without any major complications. The stories I shared were framed as casual conversations, so I wasn't sued for defamation. With the help of a lawyer, I was able to claim compensation for the abandonment and secure a satisfactory settlement. As for my sister-in-law, her marriage quickly unraveled. She had concealed her difficult personality to get married, but people rarely change. Her true nature emerged, and the marriage soared rapidly. Within 6 months, she had divorced and moved back to her parents' home. By then, the incident of my abandonment had become a notorious rumor. Eventually, the in-laws gained a reputation as a vile family that mistreated their daughter-in-law, leading to a much more subdued existence. Bob's prospects of finding a new bride in his hometown seemed bleak. I learned all this from a neighbor I had befriended and exchanged phone numbers with. It felt like perfect justice. For me, the divorce felt like a new beginning. I regretted not recognizing the true nature of Bob and his family sooner. But now I had a clear perspective. Perhaps I should have withdrawn immediately when faced with their initial opposition, but I was young and naive. I don't want to disregard the happy moments we shared, so I see the past year as a valuable lesson for my future. I'm relieved to have resolved the situation and moved on. What do you mean there's been a cancellation? I asked, my voice tinged with confusion and alarm. I had been on call during my lunch break at work and had accidentally raised my voice, but I quickly hushed myself. I hadn't initiated any cancellation. Why was this happening? My mind went completely blank. The woman from the insurance company remained unflinchingly calm, a sharp contrast to my rising panic. According to our records, we received a cancellation request from you, and the procedure has already been completed, she explained. I had signed up for a savings-type life insurance policy at the insistence of my sister-in-law, Emily. She was an insurance agent and had pressured me into choosing a plan that was more expensive than the market average because she was under tight quotas. I'm Sofia, a 40-year-old office worker living in an apartment with my husband and daughter. Today has been a whirlwind from the moment it began. As soon as Kevin woke up, he announced he had an overnight business trip and started packing. Meanwhile, my daughter, Madison, was in tears, saying, "I can't find my math textbook." Since Madison is only in the first grade, she needs a lot of help, which makes everything feel more chaotic. I wish Kevin could manage his own things without adding to the mess, asking things like, "Where's my travel bag?" or "Where are my new socks?" This year has been particularly tough with Kevin, and the thought of divorce is weighing heavily on me. Why can't you both get ready the day before? When I voiced my frustration, Madison apologized earnestly. "Sorry, Mom. I'll be more careful next time." I reassured her, saying, "It's okay. I should have checked with you yesterday. My bad." But with Kevin, it's a different story. Madison is still young. If you had prepared everything in advance, this chaos could have been avoided. Plus, you should have been thoughtful enough to buy new socks for your trip. His cutting remarks really got under my skin. "I had no idea about your business trip schedule. Aren't the socks I washed and put in the drawer good enough? I prefer new socks for my trips," he said. I found his preference odd but kept my thoughts to myself. His overnight business trips are rare, maybe once every few months, but must have been scheduled well in advance, even if he hadn't mentioned it. If he needed new socks, he should either buy them himself or let me know ahead of time. Seeing Madison's tearful face as she pleaded, "Daddy, Mommy, please stop fighting," I turned to her. "Madison, I'm sorry. It's okay. Let's find your textbook together." Kevin quietly went back to packing while I began searching through the backpack with Madison. As I glanced over at him, I noticed he was packing casual clothes that seemed more suited for a weekend than a business trip. This raised a red flag for me. Could this be another affair? My suspicions were heightened, given his past. He had cheated twice before, the first time right before Madison was born. At that point, I had seriously considered divorce, but Kevin had tearfully apologized and sought intervention from his parents. My mother-in-law begged me, "Please don't divorce my son," while my sister-in-law added, "Please don't abandon my brother." Their pleas made me reconsider my decision. Last year, Kevin cheated again, this time with a girl he met on a dating site, just like before. Kevin is the type to speak his mind bluntly, and his actions are transparently obvious, even if he thinks he's being discreet. His attempts at secrecy are almost laughable from my perspective. When he was caught, he cried and apologized once more. It was pitiful to see him, usually so arrogant, reduced to tears and sniffling. I told him, if there's any more trouble, we're definitely getting a divorce. I had him sign the divorce papers, transfer all our savings into my account, and reluctantly forgave him. But my feelings for him had completely vanished. His selfishness, including his lack of involvement with Madison, is unbearable. I'm considering holding off on the divorce until she's a bit older. In the end, the math textbook was easily found in the backpack, and Madison left cheerfully. I, however, was exhausted from the morning's chaos. With no time to make lunch, I headed to a nearby shop during my break. There, I spotted an ad for the insurance company and remembered that my policy was due to pay out a bonus around this time. Given the high premiums I pay every month, I rely on these small rewards to keep me motivated. I started thinking about what I could buy with the bonus, maybe some new autumn clothes for Madison. Feeling a bit more upbeat, I stopped at the bank to check my statement. To my surprise, not only was there no bonus deposited, but this month's insurance premium hadn't been deducted either. I was initially just puzzled, but remembering the morning's incident with Kevin, a sinking feeling began to grow. I decided to call the insurance company to find out what was going on. It turned out my sister-in-law was off that day, and another representative handled my call. That's how the cancellation issue came to light. According to her, the cancellation payment had already been processed, but I hadn't seen any money in my account. The representative insisted that all the paperwork was in order and that the insurance company had followed the proper procedures. It seemed like they were subtly implying that it wasn't their fault if someone had canceled without the owner's consent. I made it clear once more, I had no intention of canceling the policy. I'll follow up with Emily and my husband, but please verify this on your end as well. I made my point firmly and ended the call. Before I knew it, my lunch break was nearly over, and I found I had neither the time nor the appetite to eat the lunch I had bought, as other concerns were weighing on me. I informed my boss that I needed to leave early and quickly wrapped up my remaining tasks. Leaving the office ahead of schedule, I immediately called Kevin. If he was genuinely on a business trip and occupied, there was nothing I could do. "Sophia, why are you calling?" "I'm at work," Kevin answered after a few rings, his voice sounding irritated. However, I could hear lively music in the background. It was absurd that he thought he could avoid getting caught. "Sorry to bother you, but my life insurance was canceled without my knowledge, and there's no record of any cancellation payment. Do you know anything about this? I'm considering contacting the police as it might be a scam." "Ha, calling the police. It was me," Kevin admitted. I had suspected that Kevin and Emily were behind this, so when I hinted at involving the authorities, he quickly confessed, clearly taken aback. Although I had suspected him, my frustration was now boiling over. "Oh, so it was you? Where's the cancellation payment, then?" "I used it to help Mom out," Kevin replied. "Help out? Did something happen to your mother that she suddenly needed money?" "No, she just mentioned she wanted to go on a family trip for once." "A trip?" I was stunned by his unexpected response. "You canceled my life insurance for that? To fund a trip? Was the business trip just a cover?" "Yeah, I'm the beneficiary, so you can't really complain, right? We're staying at a luxurious hotel. I'm in the lobby right now, and you wouldn't believe the size of the chandelier here." Maybe he thought it was acceptable since he got caught, I thought as Kevin bragged excitedly. What's with this attitude? I have plenty of complaints. Why cancel the insurance without telling me? I've been paying the premiums out of my own salary. You should be able to cover your own trip expenses. "Ah, it's so annoying," Kevin replied. "But it's the money I'd get if something happened to you, right? So, it's my money? You're healthy and not in any danger, so we can just start paying the premiums again." I was baffled by Kevin's reasoning. "But the terms change as you get older and the premiums increase. Do you really not understand that?" "Well, I'm not the one paying for it," he said. Kevin's careless words gave me a headache. "Do your parents know about this? That you canceled my life insurance without telling me? Didn't your father say anything? And Emily is involved in this too, right? You and Emily forged my signature, didn't you?" "Yeah, Mom and Dad were actually happy about it. They thought it was a good idea. It's your fault for holding on to all our money. I just wanted to enjoy myself for once. It's no big deal. We're on a family trip and everyone's happy. That family includes your parents and Emily, right? Why aren't Madison and I included? Aren't we your family too? Insurance is meant for emergencies, and it's better not to use it." Shouldn't you have discussed this with me first if you wanted to use it for a trip? You would have said no anyway. You and Madison are always together. It's fine for me to spend time with my real family once in a while. Plus, Emily was planning to sign you up for a new life insurance policy, so it's a win-win for you guys. Maybe. I can't believe you're not embarrassed to make excuses like a child, claiming you didn't tell me because you knew I'd object. That's exactly why I didn't tell you. You always get angry. It's so frustrating. If you're going to keep nagging, maybe I should just get a divorce. You wouldn't have agreed anyway, Kevin said, sounding unusually bold, as if being at a tourist spot had given him false courage. Understood, I replied before hanging up the phone. Be prepared. I'm going to make sure Kevin and his family face the consequences. I muttered to myself. My patience had worn thin. Kevin took me for granted, knowing I'd always forgiven him despite my threats of divorce. I used to think my in-laws were decent people. Even though Emily pressured me into an expensive life insurance policy, I believed she wasn't malicious. But decent people don't secretly cancel their daughter-in-law's life insurance and use the money for themselves. Like husband, like family, I'm cutting ties with all of them. I went straight to visit the lawyer, carrying the divorce papers Kevin had filled out as a sort of talisman. I filed for divorce immediately and then picked up Madison from after-school care. On our way home, I gently explained the situation to her. She was initially surprised, but she understood after I took the time to explain everything carefully. When we got home, she asked, "So Daddy isn't coming home anymore?" "He won't be home tonight because he's staying somewhere else. We're getting divorced, so we'll be living apart. There's still a lot to sort out." I answered her cautiously, unsure of her full intent. "Then let's start cleaning up now." Quickly, she said. "What's wrong? But we're separated from Dad, right?" "Mom, you don't have to cry anymore. I hate it when Dad makes you upset." "Madison, did you always tell us to stop fighting because you were worried about me being sad?" "Of course. I had planned to avoid divorce for Madison's sake, but it seemed she had been holding back her true feelings all along. She intervened in our arguments because she was worried about me. Daddy never plays with me, even on his days off. When I try to talk to him, he just says, 'Be quiet, go away,' like this morning. He only uses me to say mean things to you. I've been so sad. I love you, Mom." She smiled at me, and her smile warmed my heart. Madison had clearly seen through Kevin's selfishness, recognizing that he prioritized himself over her, and she was fed up with him too. Discovering Madison's true feelings in this way was heart-wrenching and brought tears to my eyes. "I understand. I'm sorry for putting you through such difficult times. Madison, from now on, it will be just the two of us. But I promise to take good care of you. I love you so much." Yay! Madison's joy filled me with determination. I vowed never to let her feel sad again. While Madison worked on her homework beside me, I busied myself with tasks like consulting a lawyer and researching real estate agents and moving companies. I then reached out to my parents. When I explained the situation, they responded, "Come back home right away. This way, Madison won't have to change schools." My father also offered to borrow a truck from a friend to help us move our things in the morning. I notified the landlord, the school, and the families in Madison's commuting group that we would be relocating to my parents' house and briefly explained the situation. I planned to handle the school's detailed paperwork later and called my workplace to request a day off for tomorrow. I wanted to complete most of the tasks before Kevin returned. The next day, my parents arrived, and we quickly moved our belongings to their home. By the time Kevin got back, everything was settled except for his things, which were still in the apartment. I left a note that read, "We are divorced. We are strangers now," and left the apartment. I imagined Kevin's shock at finding us gone and felt a wave of relief and satisfaction. The smooth preparation for this divorce was thanks to the research I'd done during Kevin's previous affair. I had warned him, next time there will be no discussion. We're getting divorced, and we had agreed that I would retain custody and all marital assets. With that in mind, Madison and I began our new life at my parents' home. Later, my frantic mother-in-law called me. She must have reached out because I had blocked Kevin's number. Knowing Kevin's tendency to cry easily despite his bravado, I imagined he was probably sobbing away. "What are you thinking? Divorcing my son when he hasn't even cheated this time?" she yelled, her voice so loud it hurt my ears. I instinctively pulled the phone away from my ear. "Sophia, it's not too late. Apologize to my son right now. He's been crying nonstop because he's so upset." Aren't you embarrassed to make such a fuss over this? Apologize? Me? Why? I was so taken aback by her words that I blurted out, "Who are you?" Eh? My mother-in-law clearly didn't expect such a response from me, and her words suddenly stopped. I was taken aback by my own reaction. "Well, yes, it's me, your mother-in-law. Come on, Sophia, what's wrong with you? You're not losing your mind, are you? You're still young." "No, I only have one mother." "Are you some kind of scam artist? Like, hi, it's me, a phone scam, without giving your full name?" Since we were now divorced and effectively strangers, and given their tendency to handle things like canceling life insurance without permission, I decided there was no point in engaging in a serious conversation. I might as well continue with the pretense. "Don't joke around, Sophia. If you're going to act like this, we have our own ways of dealing with things." As expected, my mother-in-law was furious, but I remained indifferent. "What are you talking about? What can you actually do? We agreed that if there was another issue, get a divorce immediately. And Kevin himself told me over the phone that he wanted a divorce." My words made her pause, and I seized the opportunity to push further. "If you wanted to go on a trip, you should have consulted me first. Instead, you committed a crime. Did you all want to end up in jail? Unauthorized cancellation of life insurance can be considered forgery, punishable by imprisonment. I'm ready to pursue this thoroughly." I hadn't heard of any financial troubles in Kevin's family, so their actions seemed like a reckless decision, but that was precisely why I couldn't forgive them. "What? Wait a minute, we can't be criminals. Please, I'm sorry. Let's talk." Shocked by the mention of possible imprisonment, my mother-in-law's tone shifted abruptly, but it was too late. I hung up the phone and blocked my in-laws' numbers. Later, I learned that Kevin was so stunned by the divorce that he quit his job and became a recluse. As for the life insurance issue, we resolved it through an out-of-court settlement for insurance disputes. My sister-in-law was dismissed from the insurance company, which made minor news. My in-laws became the subject of neighborhood gossip and faced criticism from relatives for their poor judgment and shameful actions, leading to their social isolation. With both Kevin and my sister-in-law out of work, they seemed to be struggling financially. Meanwhile, Madison and I are enjoying a happy and free life at my parents' home. Despite the difficulties I caused my daughter, I am committed to raising her with all the love and care